Hey there, it's Melissa Brunetti, and welcome to the Mind Your Own Karma podcast.
Hey there, Karma Crew. Thanks for joining me for this episode of Mind Your Own Karma, the Adoption Chronicles. Today I have Candace Cahill on the show. She is a first mother, late discovery step-adoptee, and the author of Goodbye Again, a memoir detailing her experience of losing her son twice. Candace is a modern-day Renaissance woman and works seasonally as an Interpretive Park Ranger in Denali National Park and Preserve. Here is my interview with Candace Cahill. So we are welcoming Candace Cahill to the show today. Hi, Candace.
Hi, it's good to be here.
Yeah, so many of you might know Candace. She wrote a book, Goodbye Again, and it's, an especially difficult story to tell. So I'm grateful that you're coming on, and I'm grateful that you wrote the memoir and share your experience with all of us. And I've spoken to a few birth mothers now, and I'm kind of finding that many times the decision to relinquish doesn't start with the pregnancy. It starts with, maybe even generations before that. So I just kind of wanted to know, what was your life like growing up?
Yeah, and I will say it right off the bat that I do think that my background set me up to be more susceptible to kind of the mechanizations of the adoption world. Grew up in central Minnesota, kind of out in the sticks. We actually didn't have running water and electricity growing up, which was unusual for someone of my generation.
Yeah.
And we eventually got electricity when I was about, I think, 11. But anyway, it just meant that life was, I think, a little harder than what most people would be used to. And but the household was pretty abusive, pretty neglectful. But as a kid, it's like you just live. You do the best you can with what you got. And I'd certainly had my moments of comparing myself to classmates who seemed just completely different than me. And had certainly my moments of jealousy, because they had money and they could buy things, whereas we literally lived, where we lived was kind of right in the middle of 3 counties in Minnesota. So we went to school in one county, we shopped in another county, and the third county was typically where we went for recreation. And doing that allowed us to use our food stamps and what we needed to survive in one community where our schoolmates and classmates wouldn't see us in the store, right? So it's interesting how that kind of all played out. But yeah, so my mom divorced my dad when I was an infant. I have an older sister and I have 3 younger siblings. But she divorced my dad when I was an infant and remarried right away. And he forced my natural father to relinquish his rights so that I could be adopted and my name could be changed. And I didn't find any of that out till I was 13.
Wow.
And I remember finding out, and the one thing that came through my mind, and really was the only thing I thought about for years after, was I was relieved because the man who I grew up with was sexually abusing me. And so when it came out, all of that stopped. The abuse stopped.
Wow.
Mom divorced him. All of that happened at the same time. So my life changed drastically for the better.
Wow.
And I didn't really care who my real dad was. I had no interest whatsoever. I was just grateful that this guy wasn't my dad.
Right.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
So go ahead and tell us, share a little bit about the circumstances surrounding you getting pregnant and the decision to place your son up for adoption.
So I was fairly old, I guess. I look at it and think I was old. I was 20 when I got pregnant. I had tried going to college after high school and failed miserably. And what ended up happening is I, met a guy. We were only getting together for a couple of months and I got pregnant. But he had just gone into chemical dependency treatment before I found out I was pregnant. We got into an apartment together. We'd moved in together and everything. And he went to chemical dependency treatment, which was fine. I didn't really care one way or the other. I wasn't really all that necessarily invested in the relationship, but willing to give it a go. And then found out I was pregnant. And so, I entered it in my frame of mind because of my kind of family history. All of the women in my family who got pregnant as teenagers, which is almost everyone, you just have a baby, you become a parent. You don't have to get married. There's no reason for that. This was the late 80s, early 90s, and my sister and a couple of cousins. I mean, that was just what you did. So that's how I was going into it. It's like, okay, well, now it's my turn, right? And but my boyfriend, he was like, we should try to figure this out because this is going to be really hard. We're not ready for this, et cetera. And he's like, let's go get some counseling. And I'm like, well, okay, well, that would be great. I mean, my sister, her boyfriend just bailed, right? And I was like, well, here's somebody willing to just put some thought and effort into it.
Yeah.
But it ended up being an adoption agency, which I didn't know. And at the same time, I had very little support in my life. I didn't really have a relationship with my mom. And here we went to this agency where the woman that we were connected with was wonderful. She was kind. She was loving. She presented a motherly figure that I really needed. I needed someone in my life who seemed to be on my side. In hindsight, I can see how that played into the coercion and how it was almost, weaponized. And I don't think it was done intentionally on her part necessarily. Perhaps at the agency level, I mean, they knew how to do these things, right? But I don't think, and maybe it's because I don't want to think. I don't want to think that it was approached from that perspective because I really loved her.
Yeah.
And would still say I love her today. And even though I believe she made some serious mistakes, because in the course of that counseling, which was quote unquote decision-making counseling, they give you a booklet and they have you, write out a whole section on what the budget would be like to have a baby and write out sections of, how would you, continue school or get a job and pay for, daycare and diapers and all that. And how does your life history set you up to be a parent? In which case, mine did not in any way, shape. I mean, I couldn't pass any of these.
Wow.
Yeah. So, I came out of it really, as opposed to feeling like, they had the opportunity to build me up. They did not. They tore me down. And so then on the heels of that was, if you place your baby for adoption, you will have, a 2-parent household. You'll have, because at this point, my boyfriend had already bailed. But you'd have a 2-parent household and they'd have money and they'd have a nice house and, all of the things that I didn't have. And the way it was presented to me, I would never get.
Yeah. Wow. So kind of answered some of this, but what are some of the resources that you think you needed at that time and weren't getting that would have helped you be able to keep your son?
I think that even if just 1 or 2 people came forward and said they would help me, there was welfare, there was, medical assistance and things, but I was so jaded on it because of what I had grown up with. I didn't want to be a welfare mom. I didn't want to be that woman who's milking the system. I mean, that was the message that went through my head all the time, right?
Yeah.
No good whore, basically, just milking the system. And I didn't want to be that person. So that definitely played against me. But there wasn't ever anybody who said, hey, we can help you out with taking care of the baby once in a while, or, we could, give you rides places or anything like that. Help you get into school, help you get back into college. There just was no one that stepped forward to do that. And I also never, I mean, I look back at it now and I'm incredibly stubborn young woman who may have turned them away anyway, had they done that. I don't know.
Yeah.
Um, but I wonder what would it have been like if somebody had said, we'll help you out, or here's a car, here's, a little bit of money. I don't know.
Yeah. Or even just kind of an encouraging, you think you can do this.
Right. Yeah. Nobody ever said that they thought I could do it.
Yeah.
No, ever. And nobody in my family, even the last part of my pregnancy, I was living with my mom and, and her new husband and siblings. And they just, it was basically ignored. I slept down in the basement and went to my job and things, but my mom never said a thing about anything.
Wow. What did she say when she found out you were going to relinquish?
So I don't even remember us ever talking about it. I mean, I think she knew I was going to this counseling, but again, in hindsight, because we never talked, there was no communication ever about anything. And that certainly stems from, I think, the sexual abuse and, those patterns of behavior that were well established with, the secrecy and all of that. So we never talked about it. And I remember, coming home from the hospital. She wasn't there. She never said anything about there not being a baby with me. Right. And then in the weeks to follow, so Michael went into foster care right out of the hospital for 21 days because that was the rule,
Yeah.
So they called me at one point and asked permission to take him into a doctor because he was colicky and they just wanted to make sure he was okay. And so I had to give permission, right? So I gave permission over the phone. They had just called and I got off the phone and my mom just went into a rage and she was like, he should be here with me so I can take care of him. That was the first thing she ever said about anything related to my pregnancy, having a child, all of that. She never once came to me and said, when you bring him home, we'll be ready. I mean, if I had thought that she was going to support me, I guess I think I would have seen evidence of that. I would have seen, a crib. She would have said, let's go together and find some, a crib. Let's go get some clothes. Nothing like that was done. So that's why I just don't know what was going on in her head.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Interesting. What do you think were some of the most challenging aspects for you personally in putting your child up for adoption?
I feel like that's hard. I mean, at the time, I was a master of dissociation, which I had learned so well, growing up. And so I was pretty quickly was able to put it into a box and lock it up. One of the tools that was kind of used or things that was used against me in choosing, quote unquote, choosing relinquishment was, this promise of open adoption. And at that time it was, early 90s. So it was early versions of open adoption, which only meant that I would have the opportunity to choose from select files who the family would be. And then I would be allowed to meet them once. And I would receive updates once a year, letters and pictures. And I needed those to survive. They would come in the mail and I would sequester myself in my room and create this little ritual around finding out that he was okay, seeing how he'd grown, learning what was going on in his life. And then just grieve by myself. And then pack it all back up together and put it back in its little box and in the bottom drawer and you tuck it away and you turn it off again. And it's like, I still think of those times And I don't know how I did that.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it was like, so the openness was both a lifeline and one of the harder things.
Yeah. And then didn't that stop for a while? Did they stop sending?
It did. It stopped when he turned 8. And then I didn't get anything until just before his 18th birthday. So I had no knowledge of anything. And so that portion, that 10 years, was pretty hard to navigate because I had no recourse.
Right.
Yeah. And I look back now too, and it's like, okay, well, could I have like hired a private detective back in those days, but I never did that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I don't know if legally that would, if they
I don't
found him,
know.
if that would do anything.
Right. Because I still wouldn't have been able to contact him.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah.
So tell us about the reunion. How did that happen? What happened?
So with the reunion, so I received a letter 2 days before his 18th birthday, from the adopted father. And the letter, it was a big envelope with, almost 40 pictures, I think,
Wow.
Of the last 10 years. And the letter included an apology for having cut and not maintained contact. And an admission that his adoptive mom had committed suicide. And when Michael was 10. And that information just about destroyed me, in the sense that, okay, here I am, his first mother, who abandoned him to a family I thought was going to be better.
Yeah.
And then he was abandoned again. And at the next sentence, or, the couple sentences after that, because when I finally was able to pick the letter back up again and continue reading, there was, Michael might want to meet you, or might want to learn about you. So I did my best to, again, block out that information. I didn't really acknowledge it. I didn't acknowledge it when I talked to him or his adoptive father on the phone. And, there's parts of me now that, I feel bad that I didn't at least say, I'm sorry that you lost her, because it's terrible, right? But I was so caught up in my own grief and my own shame, and guilt for having done this, right? But at the end of the letter, there was a phone number. So I pretty much, I almost immediately called. I waited for my husband to get home and process a bit with him, but I called immediately. And I talked to his adopted dad for a little while, and then was able to talk to Michael. Now he's 18, and he didn't have a lot to say, and I didn't know what to say. I wish I'd been more prepared, but nobody prepares you for something like that, right? Hearing his voice was just one of those moments that almost stands still. But we ended up not talking for very long, because neither one of us knew what to say.
Yeah.
And he was like, let's use email, to communicate back and forth. And I was like, that's great. I feel relieved by that, because we could take it then slow, and hopefully not be too difficult for either of us. But unfortunately, that communication was very slow. We emailed a couple of times back and forth in that first week, and then it dwindled away. But with the encouragement of my husband and a few other trusted friends, they were like, you really need to let him lead the way. You really need to let him be the one that dictates how this relationship goes. And they didn't say it in the sense of, he's the one that hasn't had control in any of the situation, that's why you need to do it. But it just made sense to me that he should be the one to lead the way. So over the course of the next couple of years, the communication was pretty infrequent.
Yeah.
I would try to send a note once in a while that just says, hey, I'm thinking about you.
Still here.
Hope things are going well. I'm still here, because I didn't want to push. but I wanted him to know that I was thinking about him, and literally I was mostly obsessing about him, but I didn't want to come off as somebody who's obsessive either.
Right.
But yeah, so then when he turned 20, he wanted to meet.
Mm.
And Tom and I were able to go down to Minnesota and go to his house and meet him. And it was him and his adopted dad, and we had a wonderful day. I got to hug my son and hold him in my arms, and I never thought that I would be able to do that again.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What
So
was it
pretty.
like seeing him for the first time in a long time?
It was like looking at me as a boy, because he looked so much like me.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, but he was also big. He was taller and broader than I thought he would be. But yeah, like a big boy man version of me. And it was some of my favorite moments of that day were, sitting either because we moved around a couple of different times. So sometimes I was sitting next to him, sometimes I was sitting across from him. But like watching his mannerisms and how he moved his hands when he talked, and little things that I could see in myself.
Yeah.
And that was pretty amazing to be able to see. And he was just stinking adorable. And he was he was just so adorable. And it made me, I missed out on so much. And I felt sad for that, but I just felt so grateful.
Yeah.
That he was willing and interested in seeing me and meeting me. Yeah.
What were your thoughts and feelings leading up to the actual meeting? Did you have expectations, or like, how did you feel?
No, I don't feel like I had expectations, but I was so nervous. I was so nervous that he would change his mind. Like we would get there and we'd knock on the door and he'd open it and slam it in my face. And at the same time, I was like, he should do that. I totally deserve that. But just mostly just so afraid that he was either going to be disappointed or he was going to tell me that he was angry, that he, wanted to, cut me out. That was mostly what was going on in my head and my body.
Yeah.
Because that's how I felt. I mean, as much as I blocked that out, I blamed myself. I blamed, I deserve to be shut out because of what I did. And when that didn't happen, I was both relieved but still expecting it.
Yeah.
As the days went on. Yeah. Does that make sense?
Yes, totally.
Yeah.
Totally makes sense.
Yeah. Yeah.
So after that first meeting, how did the reunion go after that?
So I figured that we were okay. We're totally tied up. We're gonna, he had expressed an interest in meeting my brothers, because pretty much all girls in his family, and he wanted to meet my brothers specifically, and so I was all excited. So we live in Alaska, so we typically would go down to Minnesota in the wintertime, at least some of the time, and so we bought a house down there so that we'd have a place to go, and that if he wanted to come visit, he'd come visit in the winter. And we went back and tried to be there, and I tried to arrange things with them, to be able to get together. It's like where he lived was about 4 hours away from the house that we had bought, which is closer to where my family was from. And I was like, we'll help you get to us, or we'll come to you, or, we'll meet in the Twin Cities, whatever it would be. And I tried to do all these things, and nothing ever materialized. And Tom, my husband, and I, we kind of, it's like, well, he's 18, he's 19, he's 20, 21. He's so young, his life, he's busy doing other things, and he should be, that's what he's supposed to be doing. And at the same time, I just felt so devastated because I just really wanted him to want me to be there.
Yeah.
Because one word, I would have probably just moved back to Minnesota to be near him. That at one point in time, I was like, I'll just buy a house down the street from where he lives. It's like, no, that's probably not a wise choice.
Right.
But yeah. But so, yeah, we just, it was kind of 3 years of hits and misses of never getting together again in person.
Right.
And yeah.
Have you ever left a therapy session feeling like you achieved major breakthroughs, only to discover that the issues you wanted to eliminate continue to sprout up and grow? With Somatic Mindful Guided Imagery, we get to the root of your symptoms easily, gently, and efficiently, so you can spend less time weeding and more time cultivating. Yeah, so unfortunately, the reunion got cut too short. Can you talk about that and just share whatever you feel comfortable sharing about what happened?
So we got a call on July 4th of 2013 that Michael had died. And we didn't know what had happened. All we knew is that he had been found. He died in his sleep, is what they were saying. And we, I just needed to get there. I was like, first of all, I can't even express what it was like to feel like I lost him again. But I said to Tom, like, we gotta get there, because I gotta be able to see him, because they were having a funeral. And of course we live in remote Alaska, so you can't get anywhere. Right. Yeah. And it was July 4th. So like local flights weren't flying. It's like, it's like I felt everything was stacked against us. And but we were able to get out. We got down there, and the next day was his viewing, and then the funeral the day after. And we were able to be there, and we were welcomed with open arms by his adoptive family. And we got there just maybe an hour before the wake was to begin, and we helped bring some of the memorabilia. I don't know if in your family this is what they do, but in their family they brought all kinds of pictures and stuffed animals and things, memory things of Michael, and brought him to the wake, and they put them all up, and they had all these beautiful memories and things. And I remember sitting in the car next to those baskets of framed photos and all these things, and feeling both gratitude that I was there and anger that I didn't have any of the memories that were captured in those pictures. And so this horrible dichotomy was going on inside of me. But when we got there, what happened was David, Michael's dad, just started introducing me to everybody as Michael's mom. Not as Michael's birth mom, but as Michael's mom.
Wow.
And it created this shift in me, that even though Michael wasn't there, I felt like I belonged to being there.
Yeah.
And that really helped me at the time to allow myself to grieve while I was there. I'd feel so grateful that they were so welcoming, and since then they continue to be so. They continue to send me photos and things, like they'll find things and be like, oh, you need to see this. And I'm very grateful for that. But I was, as you can imagine, quite a mess.
Yeah.
Quite a while.
How did you cope in those days after?
Yeah, I don't really know. When we got back to Alaska, I told Tom that I wanted to do a remembrance ceremony for him in our town. So we had lived there for a long time, so everybody knew us, but only a few people knew that I had a son. It wasn't something that I and I was like, I got home and I was so angry with myself for not having shared him more with people. I was like, you had your chance and now you lost it. And I was like, so now I have to do something in my community to let them know that Michael had been here and that he was connected to me. And that was a really powerful thing for me to do, to be able to share him with the community. And it really helped me a lot for about 30 seconds. And, and then, I dropped back down into just, it's like, I didn't know how to keep going. I just didn't know. And, I literally sat on the end of the couch for days, hardly moved at all, stayed in my bathrobe. Tom brought me tissues and coffee and water and just kind of let me be. And I don't even know all what I thought during all those times. But the main things that kept going through my head were regrets for having done things so wrong, and not having had a chance to or not trying harder, I think. Yeah.
Did you find anything that helped you cope? Because I know your son his situation wasn't suicide, but the statistics of adoptees and suicide. And so there are a lot of birth mothers that kind of experience the loss of that child. Did you find anything that helped you along the way?
So I definitely tried to use, early internet was kind of, that was pretty common. And I really tried to use the tools online, did a lot of research, tried to find stories like mine and people like me. And there were a few, but not very many. And like I found, for example, CUB, Concerned United Birth Parents, a couple organizations like that, but they were all, down in the lower 48, far away. They didn't have a big online presence necessarily. And there weren't any local groups, So I didn't have access to that type of support group. And I tried like the Compassionate Friends, that's a big, nationwide organization for people that have lost family. They have a whole subsections, people who've lost their children. And I didn't, it helped in some ways, but at the same time, I kept running up against, when I tried to reach out for help or talk to people about it, they would offer their sympathy initially and be, I'm so sorry that you lost your son. And then they'll be like, can you tell us about him? Which is what many places encourage you to do. It's like, that's one of the ways you can support people, is let them talk about their loved ones. Right. And for me, like, they would ask that question and two things would happen. One of two things would typically happen. Either the one side was, I didn't know anything. I didn't know it. So what do I share?
Yeah.
And then the second thing is, because I don't know him, do I share that I relinquished him to adoption? Because that opens up a whole nother can of worms, right? And it's like I wasn't ready to go there. I didn't know how to do it. I hadn't had any support services, hadn't really worked through all the grief around the relinquishment, because really I didn't think I had to, because adoption is beautiful. I should feel so grateful, all the way through my whole life, right?
Yeah.
I was brave, I was selfless, I should feel good about this. And that totally didn't mesh what was going on inside me, although I was dissociating from it really well. Right. So I could then also try to believe that narrative. So it was so confusing and convoluted. And, it's like, I didn't know what to do. I found some good support from people in both infertility and for women, for people who've had miscarriages, many miscarriages. Like they could understand that grief of losing a child, but they were identifying more with the losing the child as through relinquishment. It just so interesting. But yeah, so I didn't feel like there was a lot out there.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then, in the years that followed, I definitely leaned on his family, his adoptive family. We got together frequently and they would share stories and give me keepsakes and, those kinds of things, which really helped me a lot. It really helped me a lot. Because to me, it was proof that he was okay, that he was happy. And so what happens to me now? So now I'm 11 years out, right? 11 years out of him dying. And now, as I've come out of the adoption fog myself and start listening to adoptee voices and, learning what their lived experiences were like. Now I question, like, so how much of what he shared or lived or said, how much was it real? How much was, or how much was he suppressing or hiding from the world? Right. And there's no way for me to know, and I'll never be able to ask him. And so I struggle with that.
Yeah. At that age, you probably didn't even think about it.
That's what I think as well, but who knows?
Yeah.
We don't, right?
Yeah.
I mean, I imagine had he lived and, he'd be, 30, 34 now. And, would he have started a family? Would he be with someone? And would that have then brought up things for him? Would we be having the opportunity to talk and have conversations about his life?
Yeah.
Yeah. And so for me, like being a part of the community that is filled with not just first families, but with adopted people and being able to hear their stories, that's the closest I'm ever going to get.
Yeah.
Right. And I have to believe that I really have to believe that he was happy when he was younger, based on the information I've been given. And I like to believe that as he got older, we would have developed a closer relationship.
Yeah. Yeah. How has your experience affected your views about adoption?
So I've totally swung, I think, all around. I mean, I don't know that my feelings when I was younger were based on anything other than falling into a narrative, that the adoption is beautiful. As I've started to learn more and look at things a little more critically, I've swung all the way around. Family preservation, work towards keeping children with their family, whether they're immediate family or extended family, whatever needs to happen. The stripping people of their identities has just got to stop. And the whole, in and of itself, changing the birth certificate, and that shouldn't. It's the only place in our society, in our nation, that a false document is used as a legal document.
Yeah.
That should not be the case, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. So, but even more than that, not just stripping people of their identity through the birth certificate, but stripping away their connection with their first families and the people, no matter if they're horrible people. It doesn't matter if they're horrible people, right? That was one big realization I came to considerably later in all of this. It's like, I was not in a good position to parent when I was 20 years old. I would have really done some things wrong. I probably would have, I can envision all kinds of things, bad things that I could have done and gone. But at the same time, I probably still would have been okay. He and I would have been okay. I would have probably had to apologize for things when I was an older woman. But we would have been okay. Right. And like, I look at people in my life, my mother being one who I really took a long time to come back to a relationship with her.
Yeah.
And even with all of the things that I see that she did that I consider to be abusive and horrible, I love her. That's not going to change, right? And we should be giving, we shouldn't be taking away children's ability to connect with their families, because they're still going to love them. They're still going to love them no matter what.
Yeah.
So that's the big one. That and oh man, the coercive and manipulative techniques that are used by so many of these agencies to trick and coerce young women into relinquishing. That all the same things that were done to me in 1990 are still being done now. They've just refined it. They've refined it to a fine art.
Wow.
And it's horrible. It's absolutely horrible.
Yeah.
I've taken the tack. So I believe firmly that we all have the ability to create change, not just in our personal lives, but in the larger world. And I have had to think long and hard about, where do I put my time and my effort? Where I'm putting it right now is behind trying to help other first parents find their voice and speak up. Because having written the book, shared the book, talked about the book, and talked about my story, has taken me much further in my kind of journey. A lot of people don't like that, but to try to become a healthier whole person and incorporate all these things from my past into who I am today. I can't get rid of them. They're not going to go away. I need to find, how do I hold them and make them a part of my life. And writing has been one of the big things. So I've been leading a writing group. I've been trying to work with Cub in particular to try to reach out to people to help them find their voice. Because right now you hardly ever hear a birth parent talking about their story. There's so much shame around it. So if we can help, if I can help other people work through that shame and more people speak up, that's going to go a long way, I think.
Is that why you wrote your memoir?
I wrote my memoir because I needed it as a tool to process. When I wrote it, I had no intention to publish it. I just needed to write it. And then in the process of writing it, I found that the memoir is what propelled me out of the fog. Because when I wrote it, I wrote, right? And I didn't really go back and edit. I just tried to write all the stuff down, right? And when I went back and started reading it, I was just like, oh my God, look what happened to me. If I had seen this happen to someone else, oh my God, right? And that's what propelled me out. And suddenly I'm like, okay, this is not okay. And being able, once I was like, okay, people need to know that this is what happens to people. This is how the relinquishment coercion works. But then beyond that, including, the experience of losing him through death again, and showing how loss through relinquishment and loss through death parallel each other. We can't be looking at relinquishment and saying, oh, you'll be fine, you'll forget about it, because that is not what's going to happen. It's going to get worse. It's actually going to get worse. So
how do you keep your son's memory alive today in your daily life?
I struggle with that. I mean, I've got a remembrance shelf that I have for him. I listen to music that he loved pretty regularly, that I would have probably never listened to without him. We have, Tom and I have kind of rituals that we've put in place for specifically around his birthday and around his death anniversary, where we go places, we do certain things and try to honor his memory that way. Those are kind of the main things that we do. But I struggle still because, again, I don't have the memories. I'll go back and look through his Facebook page and just look at the pictures and read the things that he wrote. I'll also connect with a couple of his friends that still connect with me, just to reach out and see how they're doing and, how they're handling their grief. Because, he's sorely missed. He was He was a wonderful person.
Yeah.
So that's mainly how I do it. If anybody has ideas of better ways, I sure am open to them, because I struggle. I mean, we just had his anniversary of his death, and there was a fire raging outside, and there's all these things going on. All I could think about is Michael, and that I wish he were here, and I wish I could see him, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. What do you think are some of the biggest misconceptions that society has about birth mothers or first parents?
Oh, so that we're don't want to use too terrible of terminology, but that we're drug addicts, that we're whores, that we're incapable, or that we're unfeeling. I think those are some of the big ones. So often that narrative of, she didn't want to keep her baby because she wanted to go out and do her own thing, whatever she wanted to do, that I also think that people don't understand the depth of shame and pain that is associated with it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Do you think that the narrative, because it used to be more, you're so selfless and brave and, is that still kind of out there as well?
Yes, it really is. It really is. And it's still, I think, the number one tool that they use that they've weaponized against young women. Yeah, for sure. Yeah. I see it everywhere, and it just makes me cringe.
Yeah. What would you like struggling first parents, especially first mothers, what would you like them to know?
That they're not alone, that the pain of relinquishment is shared pretty much by all of us, and that however you can do it, find a way to connect with other birth moms, because they will understand. You won't have to explain, that, like the support groups that I'm a part of, there's nothing like being in a group and you say something and every head in the room nods and understands. Having that connection with other people that have been through this is vital to working through it and finding your way to the other side, and especially through reunion. I mean, I think so many of us on all sides of reunion, we struggle with it because it's complicated, and we're all feel so vulnerable.
Yeah,
that's hard, right? It's hard.
Yeah. Where can we find you and your book and anything that you're doing coming up?
So the book and information about me on my website, which is CandaceCahill.com, pretty basic. Lots of links there. Actually, kind of a funny aside, my website crashed, it was deleted. And I've had to rebuild it all over. So I'm still working on it, but I have most of my things.
I would have had a nervous breakdown.
This all happened at the same time.
I know.
Oh yeah. So, and here I am, still alive, and we'll be okay.
Yes.
But yes, my website is a good place to go there. I'm going to be at the Cub Retreat. So the Concerned United Birth Parents are doing their annual retreat this year in Kansas City. It'll be the end of September. And working with Amy Seek, another author, we're putting together a storytelling event. So we're going to be encouraging participants to write a 5-minute true story and share it in one of the evenings. Wow. And I'll be leading a journaling session during the retreat as well. So my first experience at a Cub Retreat is what pushed me the rest of the way out of the fog. And the book helped me get there, start going there, but the retreat is what did it.
Yeah.
Sitting in a support group that was a mixed group with birth parents and adoptees, and getting to hear the story from someone's mouth really helped me in so many ways. Yeah.
I really think that we can help each other, all legs of the triad, just understand the whole umbrella of adoption. And, I just want to thank you specifically for coming on and telling your story. And like I said, it's just so important to kind of see that it doesn't start with relinquishment day. Adoption doesn't start the day you're relinquished. A lot of adoptees have that in their head, and I've just found that it's, so much more than that. And until we kind of realize that and hear your stories as well, we're not going to create the change that we want to see, because it starts before we were even conceived a lot of times. So thank you for coming on and sharing your story with us today.
Thank you for having me and for amplifying all of the voices that you do. This is so much a part of what we need to have out there. Thank you.
Super important. Thank you. Karma Crew, thanks for listening today. And as always, take what you need and leave what you don't. And always remember to mind your own karma. I'll see you next time.
This podcast is created for educational purposes by the telling of adoption experiences. The views expressed in this podcast may not be those of the host or Mind Your Own Karma.